In what is being seen as a thaw in U.S.-China relations, U.S. President Donald Trump has described his recent meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping as a great one, expressing optimism for what he called everlasting peace between the two global powers. The two leaders met on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea's Gyeongju. Posting on True Social, President Trump said the summit was highly productive, adding that the talks would lead to success for both countries. Further signaling this renewed tone of engagement, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Washington and Beijing would soon establish direct military communication channels. He praised the state of bilateral ties, saying relations between the two nations have never been better. Hegseth confirmed he had spoken with his Chinese counterpart, Admiral Dong Jun, on the sidelines of a regional security meeting, where both agreed that peace, stability and good relations remain the best path forward for the two great and strong countries. But even as Washington speaks of peace, tensions are far from easing. Hours after that meeting, Hegseth urged Southeast Asian nations to strengthen their maritime forces, warning against what he called China's destabilizing actions in the South China Sea.
China's provocative actions also demonstrate a lack of respect for your countries, challenging and threatening territorial sovereignty. China's sweeping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea fly in the face of their commitments to resolve disputes peacefully. And I will say I welcome the dialogue.
The U.S. has repeatedly accused Beijing of escalating intimidation and carrying out illegal activities across the disputed waters. The Defense Secretary told ASEAN counterparts that China's recent moves from ramming ships to declaring the Scarborough Shoal a nature reserve reflect a growing disregard for regional sovereignty, even as dialogue continues between Washington and Beijing. The armed forces of the Philippines have confirmed that joint naval and air drills with the United States, Australia and New Zealand in the disputed South China Sea. It marks the 12th round of multinational exercises since last year, part of Manila's efforts to defend what it calls its sovereign rights in the contested maritime region. The gestures of goodwill in Gyeongju may suggest a warming of ties, but on the high seas, the chill between Washington and Beijing remains. Mr. Greg Swenson is an international affairs expert and a China analyst. He is now joining us live from London. Mr. Swenson, it's good to see you. Many critics say that they do not have hopes in this peace agreement or this trade agreement between the United States and China because it only lasts for 1 year. What do you say?
Well, I think there has to be some steps. And I think, the president has been very deliberate in trying to, get China to the table, to the bargaining table. He's had to do that with some rather aggressive economic threats. And that's not unusual for this president because it works. And I think, yes, we'd like to see a longer strategy and a longer agreement, a longer dated agreement. But on the other hand, we have to start somewhere. And I think the president has done a good job of at least getting something on the table and avoiding any more, first of all, avoiding conflict, but also avoiding economic devastation or dependence that we have on so many Chinese imports. So I think it's a first step in a very long process.
Mr. Swenson, let me take you back to the APEC summit where we saw President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping shaking hands and greeting each other. Many critics or many naysayers said that it was embarrassing for President Trump because President Xi did not seem very enthusiastic.
Right. Well, look, I think the critics of the president and much of the media in the U.S. are always going to be critical of the president, no matter what he does. And so if he hadn't had that meeting with Xi, they would have said that he was disrupting or destroying the relationship with China. And in many respects, the president, did sort of, blow up in many ways the relationship with China, but he wanted to reshape it in his own vision. And I think that's what he's doing now. So look, the critics of the president are always going to say that, there was some weakness on the part of the president. That's not something that I would typically worry about or associate with this president. What he's doing is in many ways historical. And I think that this might be the most important part of President Trump's legacy is committing to peace with China, but at the same time fixing the economic problems, starting with the dependency on rare earth minerals, but also other problems with the trade relationship that's been around for 25 years now and really needed to be fixed.
Mr. Svensson, very quickly, I just want your comments on what the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said at the APEC summit. He says China's provocative actions also demonstrate a lack of respect for your countries, challenging and threatening territorial sovereignty. How do you think China will respond to his statements?
Well, yeah, look, the president, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, he's absolutely right to say that. And, he's got some really good points. At the same time, he's going to try to be diplomatic as well. There's a time for making firm statements and not letting China just get away with it like we have been for decades now. And remember, President Clinton, as recently as 1995, 96, was sending aircraft carriers and battle groups to the region. He sent the Nimitz, for example, the aircraft carrier Nimitz, or battleship, sorry. I can't remember which one it is, but the Nimitz was sent to Taiwan and did exercises or performed exercises. So, look, I think the president is serious about peace and making sure, he's very much a peace-oriented president, an anti-war president, but you have to have peace through strength. You have to have deterrence. And I think the war secretary is doing a fantastic job in sort of re-energizing the military. And I think it's important to demonstrate that with China, who's a potential adversary.
Mr. Greg Svensson, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.